It was supposed to be a routine delivery, a milk run across the Orion Arm. Ensign Jacques Rocket Riley, a man whose nickname belied his usually cautious nature, had piloted his diplomatic courier craft, the Stardust Rambler, through countless jump points without a hitch. Today, however, the universe had decided to throw a wrench, or rather, a cosmic anomaly, into his carefully planned trajectory. One moment the Rambler was gliding smoothly through hyperspace. The next, alarms blared. An ominous red glow bathed the cockpit, and the ship bucked violently like a startled beast. Hull integrity failing, engine core destabilized. Brace for impact. The ship's automated voice shrieked, its calm tone starkly at odds with the chaos. Jacques fought the controls, sweat slicking his brow as he wrestled with a craft that seemed determined to tear itself apart. He slammed his hand on the emergency landing sequence, praying to whatever cosmic entity was listening that the unknown planet rushing into view wasn't a gas giant or a barren rock. The atmosphere screamed around the Rambler as it plummeted, the ship groaning under the immense strain. Trees, impossibly tall and shimmering with an ethereal light, flashed beneath him. He pulled back on the stick with every ounce of his strength, the ship shuddering, complaining, but slowly, miraculously leveling out. With a final sickening crunch and a shower of sparks, the Stardust Rambler belly-flopped into a clearing, its once sleek hull now a crumpled mess of scorched metal and twisted wires. Silence. For a long moment, the only sound was the drip of coolant, the settling groans of tortured metal, and Jack's own ragged breathing. He unbuckled his harness, his limbs stiff, and stumbled through the wreckage of his cockpit. The air that rushed in as he forced open the emergency hatch was sweet, surprisingly so, filled with the scent of damp earth and an unfamiliar, delicate floral perfume. Sunlight a gentle, golden hue, unlike the harsh glare of Earth's sun, filtered through the impossibly dense canopy above. He pushed himself out, his boots sinking slightly into the soft, mossy ground. The clearing was vibrant, alive with flora that pulsed with soft, internal light, and strange, melodic bird-like calls echoed through the trees. His initial relief at surviving quickly morphed into a profound sense of isolation. He was stranded, utterly alone, on an uncharted world. His comms were dead, his ship was scrap. Just as the weight of his predicament began to settle, a rustle in the bioluminescent foliage snapped him to attention. He froze, every instinct screaming danger. The rustling grew louder, closer, and then, emerging from the glowing undergrowth, came a sight that stole the very breath from his lungs. They were magnificent. 6-limbed beings, easily twice his height, emerged with a fluid grace that defied their size. Their skin shimmered with iridescent scales, shifting through a spectrum of emeralds and sapphires, and intricate, delicate crests adorned their heads, radiating a soft, internal luminescence. Their eyes, large and multifaceted, observed him with an unervingly calm intensity. Each carried a staff of what looked like solidified light, held with an easy strength. They weren't hostile, but their presence was overwhelming, their silence unnerving. Jacques raised his hands slowly, a universal gesture of surrender, his mind racing. Were they hostile? Friendly? Did they even understand his gesture? Before he could formulate a greeting, the honor guard parted, revealing a figure that commanded instant attention. She was taller than the others, her scales a deeper, richer sapphire, and her crest was larger, more ornate, glowing with a vibrant, pulsating rhythm. Her posture exuded an undeniable aura of authority, of royalty. Her multifaceted eyes, darker than the others, fixed on him with an intensity that made his skin prickle. She took a slow, deliberate step forward, her gaze unwavering, studying him from head to toe. Jacques felt like an insect under a microscope. He braced himself, expecting a challenge, a command, perhaps even an attack. Instead, a voice, rich and resonant, spoke, echoing slightly in the clearing. The words were in perfect, unaccented galactic standard, a language understood by most interstellar civilizations. "Will you marry me, human?" The question hung in the air, surreal and utterly baffling. Jacques could only gape, his jaw slack, his carefully constructed diplomatic composure shattered into 1,000 pieces. The sounds of the jungle, the scent of the alien flowers, even the wreckage of his ship, faded into the background. All that remained was the impossibly elegant alien princess, her luminous eyes fixed on him, and her utterly bewildering proposal. He stood there, a scrawny human in a crumpled flight suit, on an unknown planet, staring at an alien royal who had just asked for his hand in marriage. This was, without a doubt, the single strangest day of his life. Jacques stood frozen, the alien princess's words echoing in the sudden silence of the clearing. "Will you marry me, human?" His mind, still reeling from the crash, struggled to process such an utterly surreal request. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. Princess Lyra of the Lumina dynasty, for that was her name, simply observed his stunned reaction with a serene, almost detached expression, her luminous eyes betraying no hint of jest or malice, only a profound certainty. The six-limbed honor guard, rigid and silent, seemed to hold their breath, their multifaceted eyes also fixed on him, awaiting his response. The soft, alien sunlight filtering through the glowing canopy highlighted the shimmer of their scales, making them appear otherworldly and ancient. When Jacques finally found his voice, it came out as a weak croak. "Marry me?" Lyra inclined her head slightly, a gesture that was both elegant and unwavering. "It is the ancient custom," she replied, her voice a melodious hum that resonated through his bones. Before he could voice another confused question, a gentle but firm pressure guided him forward. He wasn't being dragged, but rather ushered, with an undeniable purpose, as if his acceptance was a foregone conclusion. The guards moved with him, their staffs of solidified light glowing softly, illuminating a path through the impossibly tall, glowing flora. The journey to what he soon realized was a city, and then a palace, was a dizzying blur of new sensations. The ground beneath his feet was not solid rock or dirt, but a springy, living surface that pulsed gently with each step. The air grew warmer, infused with an even richer, sweeter perfume as they passed through towering archways of living, braided trees. The city itself wasn't built, but grown. Structures of organic material rose from the earth, twisting upwards like giant, luminous fungi, connected by shimmering bridges of solidified mist. Everything pulsed with a soft internal light, creating an ethereal glow that made the entire landscape feel like a dream. Jacques, still in his singed flight suit, felt utterly out of place, a rough, practical human in a world of breathtaking, impractical beauty. He glanced back once and saw the honor guard carefully securing the perimeter around the wreckage of his ship, their movements precise and coordinated. They weren't just warriors. They were caretakers, perhaps even archaeologists, of his unfortunate arrival. He was led through increasingly ornate passages, each more vibrant and alive than the last, until they arrived at what could only be the heart of the Lumina dynasty, a vast, cavernous chamber, its walls adorned with shimmering tapestries woven from luminous fibers depicting scenes of cosmic grandeur and beings of pure light. The air here was thick with a faint musical hum, and the light, though soft, was so pervasive that shadows seemed to simply not exist. Lyra finally turned to him, her expression softening, though her regal bearing remained. "You are Jacques Riley, of the Human Star Confederacy," she stated, her voice surprisingly gentle, as if the earlier formality had been part of a necessary ritual. "My sensors confirmed your identity from your vessel's beacon before its destruction." Jacques nodded dumbly, still trying to catch up. Lyra then began to speak, explaining the bewildering situation with a calm eloquence that cut through his confusion, though not his disbelief. "For millennia," she began, her luminous eyes sweeping over the chamber as if addressing an unseen audience, "our people, the Xylos, have lived in isolation. Our world, Lumina, is a sanctuary. Yet an ancient prophecy, passed down through generations, of the Lumina dynasty, dictates that the monarch's eldest child must choose a mate from beyond the veil of stars, a being utterly unlike our own, to usher in an era of unprecedented prosperity and prevent the stagnation that threatens all isolated civilizations." She paused, her gaze settling back on him. "You, Ensign Riley, are the first off-worlder to ever land on Lumina. You are, as the prophecy foretold, the one—" Jacques stared, his mouth agape once more. "BUT Princess, with all due respect," he stammered, finally finding some footing. "Humans don't just marry on sight. We have customs. We have choices. We have ... love. It's a connection, a bond, not just a matter of prophecy or convenience." He tried to explain the complexities of human relationships, the concept of mutual consent, the long process of courtship. He spoke of dating, of getting to know someone, of shared experiences and emotional bonds. He even mentioned the idea of personal compatibility, of two individuals choosing to embark on a life together because of a deep personal affection. He emphasized that marriage was a profound commitment, not a simple transaction or the fulfillment of a duty. He hoped his earnestness, his very human perspective, would sway her, or at least make her understand the absurdity of the situation. It was just an ensign, a courier, pilot, not a prince, not a diplomat, certainly not a prophetically chosen consort. He was just ... Jacques. Lyra listened patiently, her crest pulsing with a gentle, rhythmic light, her expression unreadable. When he finished, a faint, almost imperceptible shift occurred in her luminous eyes, a fleeting hint of something akin to amusement, but mixed with a deep ancestral gravitas. "Choice, love, bond," she repeated softly, the concepts clearly alien to her people's direct, ritualistic approach. "These are beautiful concepts, human, and perhaps with time they may grow, but the prophecy is absolute. The union is paramount." She didn't dismiss his words. She simply presented them as irrelevant to the ancient law governing her people's destiny. My people, she continued, her voice gaining a renewed resonance, have already been informed. The betrothal has been proclaimed. The preparations for the union of stars are already underway. Jox's heart sank. He wasn't just stranded, he was trapped. He was to be a pawn in an ancient alien prophecy, an accidental groom in a cosmic arranged marriage. The news hit him with the force of a physical blow. He wasn't even given a choice. A sudden chill, not of temperature but of dread, snaked down his spine. He looked around the vast chamber. Though the Xylo's guards were outwardly respectful, he sensed other eyes upon him. He saw movement in the shadows of the luminous architecture, figures observing him with a scrutiny that felt less like welcome and more like judgment. He caught a glimpse of a particularly large Xylos, its scales a dark, almost obsidian hue, its crest more angular and imposing than Lyra's, observing him from a high archway with an expression that was distinctly unfriendly, almost contemptuous. This was not just a strange new world. It was a foreign court with its own unspoken rules, its own hidden agendas. He was a complete unknown, an intruder, and now, by decree, a future consort. The weight of expectations, of traditions he couldn't comprehend, settled heavily on his shoulders. He was an outsider, vulnerable, and a target. The union of stars wasn't just a marriage. It was an entanglement in a destiny he never asked for, a destiny that suddenly felt fraught with unseen dangers. He swallowed hard the sweet alien air, suddenly tasting bitter. His awful day had just gotten infinitely worse. Life in the Xylos palace was a whirlwind of bizarre rituals and opulent ceremonies, each moment a stark reminder to Jox of how utterly out of his depth he was. His living quarters were luxurious by any standard, a vast chamber that pulsed with soft, multicolored light from the living walls, filled with alien furniture that molded to his shape like warm, responsive jellies. Yet every comfort was alien, every object unfamiliar. The food was perhaps the biggest challenge. He missed solid food, the satisfying crunch of a potato chip, the warmth of coffee. Here, meals consisted of nutrient-rich pastes that shifted in flavor and texture, sometimes resembling sweet fruit, other times a savory, earthy essence, but always a paste. Accompanying these were bioluminescent fruits that glowed faintly, tasting metallic and sweet, and drinks that shimmered with internal light. He tried to be polite, forcing down mouthfuls, but his human stomach rebelled, churning with quiet protest. The Xylos, he noticed, ate with a slow, almost meditative grace, their multi-jointed limbs moving with delicate precision. He constantly worried about making a social blunder, a fear amplified by the constant, observing eyes of the palace staff and, more pointedly, the numerous zealous nobles who seemed to glide through the hallways like silent, judging specters. His days were filled with lessons in Xylos etiquette, a bewildering maze of intricate gestures, specific vocal inflections, and rigid social hierarchies. He learned that a certain tilt of the head meant respect, while another, almost identical, signified a grave insult. He practiced elaborate greetings, his human hands feeling clumsy compared to the elegant, fluid movements of the Xylos's 6 limbs. Lyra herself often observed these lessons, her luminous eyes following his every awkward movement. Sometimes He caught a flicker of curiosity, a hint of something resembling amusement, but more often a deep, almost melancholic burden in her gaze. She carried the weight of her people's expectations, the prophecy, like an invisible shroud. He began to see that her initial direct proposal was not a casual act, but a deeply ingrained cultural imperative, a responsibility she took with absolute seriousness, regardless of her own feelings or his. Beyond the formal lessons, the true challenge lay in navigating the treacherous currents of the Xylos court. It didn't take Jacques long to identify the source of the unfriendly gaze he'd encountered upon his arrival. Lord Valeris, Lyra's cousin, was a formidable figure, his obsidian. Scales A. Stark contrast to Lyra's vibrant sapphire, his crest an imposing, sharp-edged crown of bone and light. Valerius moved through the palace with a predatory grace, his presence radiating a cold, calculating ambition. He never directly confronted Jacques, not in the open, but his contempt was clear in the subtle flick of his tail, the way his multifaceted eyes lingered on Jacques for a fraction too long, filled with disdain. Whispers followed Jacques like shadows. He'd overhear snatches of conversation, seemingly innocent at first, about his primitive nature, his lack of grace, his unsuitable origins. Then the whispers grew sharper, hinting at his questionable arrival, his suspicious timing, questioning if he was truly the one chosen by prophecy or merely a convenient, disposable tool. The intrigue wasn't just verbal. Subtle acts of sabotage began to plague Jacques' daily life. His ceremonial robes would mysteriously go missing just before a formal event, forcing him to scramble and appear late. His nutrient-paced meals would occasionally have a slightly off taste, nothing overtly poisonous, but enough to cause discomfort. He'd find critical translations of Xylos texts misplaced, or vital comms relays that he needed to study would mysteriously fail. Once, during a delicate tea ceremony where specific pouring motions were crucial, the serving vessel seemed to inexplicably shift in his hand, causing a small but embarrassing spill that drew gasps from the watching courtiers and a barely concealed sneer from Valeris. Jacques knew these weren't accidents. He was being tested, undermined, perhaps even subtly poisoned against the court. The feeling of being watched intensified, a constant prickle on the back of his neck. He became hyper-aware of every movement, every glance, every hushed conversation. The palace, with all its shimmering beauty, began to feel less like a sanctuary and more like a gilded cage with unseen predators circling. Despite the escalating tension, an unexpected connection began to form between Jacques and Lyra. During his etiquette lessons, or during official gatherings, their eyes would meet. Sometimes Lyra would offer a small, almost imperceptible gesture that helped him navigate a tricky social situation, a subtle tilt of her crest, a barely there shift in her posture that guided his own. She was intelligent, observant, and beneath the weight of her royal duties. He sensed a deep sense of responsibility and a quiet longing for something more than just ritual. One evening, during a private session where she was explaining the deeper meanings of Xylos proverbs, she paused, her luminous eyes studying him. "You are different human," she said, her voice softer than he'd ever heard it. "Your world speaks of choice, of a bond freely given. These concepts are new." He saw a flicker of genuine curiosity, a desire to understand beyond the confines of her ancient traditions. It was a brief, fragile moment, a shared understanding in a world designed to keep them separate. This budding, unspoken alliance became crucial during a particularly tense diplomatic gathering. Lord Valerius, taking advantage of a moment of vulnerability, subtly manipulated the conversation to highlight Jacques' lack of sophistication, challenging him to perform a complex Xylos greeting dance that required years of training. The challenge was designed to publicly humiliate Jacques, to expose him as a crude outsider. A hush fell over the court, everyone anticipating his spectacular failure. Jacques' heart pounded, his mind racing for an escape. But then he caught Lyra's eye. She offered him a fleeting, almost imperceptible nod, a spark of encouragement. Taking a deep breath, Jacques surprised everyone. He didn't attempt the full dance. Instead, he bowed deeply, a simple, human gesture of respect that transcended Xylo's complexity, and then, with a wry, human smile, he spoke. "Princess Lyra has already taught me the most important Xylos custom, the custom of welcoming. And in that I believe even a simple human can excel." His unexpected wit, his refusal to be baited, and his graceful deflection earned a few surprised murmurs, and even a few approving clicks from some of the more neutral courtiers. Lyra's crest glowed a little brighter. Valerius, however, merely narrowed his dark eyes, a new, colder fury simmering beneath his stoic facade. Jacques knew then that his survival in this alien court depended not just on Lyra's protection, but on his own wits and on his ability to navigate a hidden war of power that simmered beneath the surface of the Xylos' serene, bioluminescent world. The union of stars was no longer just an arranged marriage. It was a high-stakes game, and he was undeniably caught in its web, despite the luxurious comforts of his palace chambers, which included organic sleeping platforms that subtly hummed, with soothing frequencies and nutrient-paste dispensers that could replicate a surprising range of flavors. Jacques found himself yearning for the familiar grit of an Earth-standard cafeteria or the simple clunk of a dropped wrench. He still struggled with the shimmering, tasteless nutrient pastes, craving the satisfying crunch of solid food, and the intricate Xylos etiquette lessons, though becoming slightly less mortifying, remained a constant source of anxiety. He learned that a specific curl of a Xylos' six-fingered hand could signify deep approval, while an almost identical, but slightly more open, gesture could mean profound disappointment, leading to endless internal debates about whether he was subtly insulting or praising a high-ranking official. Yet, amidst this bewildering immersion into Xylos culture, a surprising solace began to emerge in his interactions with Princess Lyra. She continued to oversee his cultural education, but these sessions slowly transformed from formal lessons into something more akin to shared explorations that one evening, while explaining the Xylos concept of resonant truth, a deeply spiritual and philosophical idea tied to the very light of their planet, Jacques, tired from a day of memorizing complex bowing sequences, found himself stifling a yawn. Seeing this, Lyra paused, her luminous eyes studying him with that familiar, unnerving intensity. "You seem weary, human," she observed. Jacques, on a whim, decided to introduce a piece of human absurdity. "Yeah, well, in my world we have a saying, 'Sleep is for the weak, but coffee is for the brave,' though I could really use some sleep right now." Lyra blinked, her crest dimming slightly in confusion. Coffee? Brave? Jax chuckled, a short, tired sound. It's a hot, bitter drink. Gives you energy. And it's brave because, well, sometimes it tastes terrible, but you drink it anyway. He then tried to explain human humor, the concept of a joke, the delightful irrationality of puns. He told her a simple one about a robot walking into a bar and waited. Lyra's expression remained blank for a moment, and then a series of soft, resonant clicks, a sound he hadn't heard before, emanated from her. It was, he realized with a jolt, Xylo's laughter, a sound like wind chimes played by liquid light. It was brief, subtle, but undeniably laughter. From that moment, a tiny crack appeared in the rigid wall of prophecy and tradition that surrounded them, allowing for a glimmer of genuine connection. He began introducing other small, mundane aspects of human existence. He taught her a simple children's game from Earth, a game of chance involving gestures, which he called rock, paper, scissors. Lyra, initially confused by the arbitrary rules and the concept of losing for fun, eventually grasped its playful nature. She'd meticulously analyze his hand gestures, her multifaceted eyes darting between his rock, paper, and scissors before making her own decision, often with a hint of that same soft, chiming laughter. He also, tentatively, introduced the idea of physical closeness without ritualistic meaning. One particularly stressful day, after a grueling session of Xylo's historical lineage recitation, Jax found himself sighing heavily. Lyra, sensing his fatigue, shifted closer on the organic settee. Without thinking, Jax reached out, his hand hovering. For a moment, then gently took one of her 6-fingered hands in his. It was a simple, comforting, human gesture. Lyra's hand was surprisingly cool, dry, and slightly textured, yet surprisingly yielding. She didn't pull away. Instead, her crest pulsed with a brighter, warmer light, and for the first time, he felt a genuine, if fleeting, connection that transcended their species. The touch was brief, innocent, but profoundly meaningful in turn. Lyra began to reveal more of herself and her people's deeper truths. She spoke of the Gelus's ancient history, not just the formal lineage he studied, but the emotional narratives, the periods of great joy, profound sorrow, and existential fear that had shaped their path to isolation. She explained the immense burden of the prophecy, how it wasn't merely a tradition, but a desperate plea from their ancestors to prevent their civilization from becoming entirely stagnant, too inward-looking. She spoke of the veil of stars that had always separated them, and her own profound isolation as the chosen one, waiting for a mate who would be utterly alien. He realized that her directness, her immediate proposal, was not coldness, but the culmination of a lifetime of waiting, a desperate hope for the fulfillment of her duty. He saw the vast, crushing weight of responsibility she carried, a burden that made his own problems as an ensign seem trivial. There was a quiet strength in her, a stoic acceptance of her destiny, but also a deep yearning for understanding. There, conversations, initially driven by necessity, began to flow more freely, becoming a blend of cultural exchange and genuine, if cautious, friendship. This budding camaraderie, however, did not go unnoticed. Lord Valeris, Lyra's ambitious cousin, watched their interactions with an ever-darkening gaze. He saw Jax's casual gestures, his human humor, his seemingly informal ease with the princess, not as harmless pleasantries, but as dangerous infringements, a blatant disregard for sacred Xylos decorum. Valerius saw him as a contaminant, a crude disruption to the refined purity of the Lumina dynasty. The subtle acts of sabotage against Jax escalated. His sleeping platform would inexplicably lose its comforting hum, causing restless nights. Important communication crystals would shatter unexpectedly when he touched them. During a formal procession, a section of the shimmering floor beneath his feet would momentarily dim, almost causing him to stumble, a seemingly minor incident. That could be interpreted as ill omen by the superstitious courtiers. Jax knew Valerius was testing his limits, pushing him, trying to provoke a reaction that would expose his primitive nature. The inevitable confrontation came during a grand assembly, a quarterly gathering where major societal issues were debated and resolved. Valerius, his dark scales gleaming under the palace's soft lights, stood before the assembled nobles, his voice resonant and commanding. He introduced a new cultural challenge, ostensibly to further educate the human consort in the nuances of Xylos philosophy. The challenge was deceptively simple. Lyra was to pose a complex philosophical riddle, one rooted in ancient Xylos cosmology, and Jax was to provide an answer that would satisfy the elders, or risk being deemed unfit for the Union. It was a trap designed for his public failure. Lyra, her crest pulsing rapidly with unease, posed the riddle. When the star whispers its final breath and the void answers, what then remains of the light? It was a profound question designed to elicit a deeply spiritual, Xylos-centric answer. The court held its breath, many expecting Jax to stammer, to offer some crude, literal interpretation, or worse, to remain silent. Jax felt the pressure, the weight of 1,000 Xylos eyes. He saw the subtle sneer on Valerius's face. He knew he couldn't answer in a way that resonated with Xylos philosophy. He simply didn't possess that understanding. But then he looked at Lyra, who met his gaze, her own luminous eyes filled with a quiet, desperate hope. He remembered her laugh, the feel of her hand in his, the human things they had shared. He remembered the simple, messy truths of humanity. Taking a deep breath, he stepped forward. When the star whispers its final breath, Jax began, his voice clear and steady, cutting through the expectant silence, and the void answers, "What remains of the light?" He paused, letting the question hang. "What remains?" he continued, looking directly at Lyra, and then out at the assembled court. "Is the memory, the echo, the love that light created, the life it nurtured, the stories it inspired. Light does not vanish, it transforms. It becomes the energy of new stars, the warmth of new worlds, the knowledge passed down. It becomes the hope for a new dawn, even in the deepest void." A ripple went through the assembly. It wasn't the Xylos answer, but it was an answer that, in its simplicity and profound emotional resonance, transcended their rigid philosophical structures. It was a deeply human answer, one that spoke of continuity, of life, and of an enduring spirit. Lyra's crest glowed brilliantly, a silent testament to her approval. Even some of the neutral courtiers clicked their limbs together softly, a sound of respectful contemplation. Valerius's face, however, remained frozen, his multifaceted eyes narrowing into cold slits. His plan had backfired. Jax had not only avoided humiliation, but had inadvertently showcased a different kind of strength, a resilience and emotional depth that was utterly foreign, yet undeniably compelling. The incident cemented Lyra's trust in him and sparked a grudging, reluctant respect from segments of the court. But for Valeris, it only intensified his fury, transforming his contempt into a chilling, dangerous resolve. Jacques had survived this test, but he knew, with a deepening sense of dread, that far greater challenges and far darker schemes lay ahead in this beautiful, treacherous alien palace dot as the day of the union. The ceremonial binding of Jacques and Lyra drew closer. The subtle intrigues that had plagued Jacques since his arrival began to shed their subtle guise, morphing into something far more sinister and overt. The seemingly random accidents became more frequent, more pointed. Jacques' sleep was routinely disturbed by strange, high-pitched frequencies emanating from the walls of his chambers, just on the edge of audibility, designed to induce fatigue and confusion. Critical data logs concerning the ancient Xylos prophecy, which Lyra had personally provided to him for study, would mysteriously vanish from his private reading sphere, only to reappear corrupted or incomplete hours later. The feeling of being watched intensified, a constant prickle of dread along his spine, making every shadow seem to hold a pair of observing, multifaceted eyes. He confided in Lyra, explaining the escalating pattern of disruption. Lyra, though initially steeped in the Xylos' trust of their own systems, began to see the logic in his observations, especially after witnessing some of the subtle malfunctions herself. Her own crest would pulse with a worried, flickering light as they discussed the growing anomalies. One morning, while inspecting a delicate piece of ancient Xylos technology, a small, pulsating orb that was supposed to enhance understanding, Jacques noticed a microscopic imperfection, a barely visible scratch on its surface. He dismissed it at first, but then remembered similar, tiny blemishes on other artifacts he'd been given to study, items that had then malfunctioned. His human eye for detail, honed by years of meticulously checking ship systems, picked up what the Xylos, relying on their perfect organic technology, might overlook. He used a tiny, portable scanner he'd salvaged from the Stardust Rambler wreckage, a crude, human device that most Xylos ignored, and discovered faint traces of an unknown energy signature, a residue inconsistent with Xylos engineering. It was an energy signature he'd seen before, in the faint flickers of light from the obsidian-scaled Lord Valeris's personal guard, during their more menacing patrols near his quarters. Lyra, seeing the evidence from his primitive scanner, began to understand. Valeris's power plays weren't just about public humiliation. They were a systemic undermining, a quiet dismantling of her authority and the prophecy's legitimacy. Together they started looking for a pattern, and the more they dug, the clearer the picture became. The energy fluctuations around the palace, which Jacques had initially dismissed as quirks of Xylos organic technology, were concentrated around specific, highly secured areas. These weren't random. They pointed to the oldest, deepest levels of the palace, areas Lyra herself rarely visited, considering them ancient storage vaults. These areas were supposedly dormant, holding historical relics and archival data from before the Xylos retreated into isolation. But the energy signatures Jacques detected were active, recently used. During a tense, hushed meeting late one cycle, Lyra, using her royal access codes, retrieved detailed schematics of these ancient levels. What they discovered sent a chill down Jax's spine. Deep beneath the palace, far below the beautiful, glowing living chambers, was a colossal hidden chamber. And within it, dormant for millennia, was not just historical data, but a massive, intricate Xylos device, an artifact of immense power. It was called the Nexus Harmonizer, a technology whispered about in their oldest legends, capable of altering the very energy pathways of a planetary system. It wasn't a weapon per se, but a tool of cosmic engineering, capable of terraforming worlds, of redirecting stellar energy, of shaping destinies on a scale that dwarfed human understanding. And it was active. Someone was attempting to wake it up. "The prophecy," Lyra whispered, her luminous eyes wide with dawning horror. "It isn't just about finding a mate. It's about choosing a true partner, one who can discern deception and protect the Xylos from internal threats." She explained that the prophecy contained a hidden clause, a subtle test designed by ancient Xylos monarchs to ensure that their chosen heir's consort was not only outwardly suitable, but possessed the discernment to uncover threats from within. Their own ranks, a test Lyra herself had unknowingly been part of. Valerius, she realized, wasn't just trying to usurp her. He was trying to seize control of the Nexus Harmonizer. He hadn't manipulated Jax's landing by pure chance. He had detected Jax's distress signal, and then, using a crude, ancient Xylos beacon, one that mirrored the energy signature Jax had found, he had subtly altered the atmospheric readings around Lumina, making it appear as the only viable landing site for a craft in distress. He had lured Jax here, not just as a prop for the prophecy, but as a crucial, unwitting key. The prophecy, Lyra now understood, spoke of a veil of stars that would be parted, not just by an outsider, but by the unseen hand of deceit within. Valerius believed the prophecy would be fulfilled by his manipulation, by him controlling the chosen outsider and then accessing the Nexus through Lyra's royal lineage. His plan, now terrifyingly clear, was to use the union of stars as a facade. Once the marriage was complete, Valerius, as Lyra's closest blood relation and a high-ranking noble, planned to exploit the ancient ritual security protocols, which granted the royal consort's direct kin expanded access to royal artifacts for ceremonial purposes. He intended to use this access, not to protect the Xylos, but to gain full control of the Nexus Harmonizer. His ultimate goal wasn't just the throne. It was the power to shape the Xylos' future, and potentially the future of entire star systems according to his own twisted vision. He wanted to break their isolation, not for progress, but for conquest, using the Harmonizer to reshape worlds and bring other species under Xylos' dominion, with himself as the absolute ruler. The irony was bitter. Valerius, who decried Jax as primitive, was using primitive human vulnerabilities, his ship's distress and ancient Xylos prophecy for his own greedy ends. The realization brought a cold dread to Jax. He wasn't just a groom in a bizarre wedding. He was an unwilling participant in a galactic power play, a critical component in Valerius's scheme. The Harmonizer, in the wrong hands, could unleash unimaginable devastation. The quiet hum of the palace, once soothing, now felt like a low, menacing thrum, a prelude to disaster. The beautiful, bioluminescent world, once a place of wonder, now felt like a gilded trap. Lyra, her luminous eyes now hardened with resolve, looked at Jax, her hand instinctively going to one of her ceremonial blades, a thin, curved piece of solidified light. "He plans to use the Union." "To use us," she stated, her voice tight with a newfound urgency. "We must stop him." The wedding was no longer just a personal matter or a cultural imperative. It was a ticking clock. The fate of the Xylos, and potentially countless other civilizations, hung in the balance, resting on the unlikely shoulders of a human ensign and an alien princess, both pawns in a prophecy now united by a shared, terrifying secret. The intricate, beautiful palace, once a symbol of ancient peace, now pulsed with the silent, insidious threat of betrayal. The day of the union arrived, shrouded in a tension so thick it felt almost palpable, even amidst the palace's usual effulgence. The air hummed, not just with the festive bioluminescence, but with a silent, unseen struggle for power. Lyra, adorned in ceremonial regalia that shimmered with every shift of light, her crest pulsing with a rapid, almost frantic rhythm, met Jox's gaze. Her eyes, usually serene, now held a fierce, determined glint. Jox, clad in a specially tailored Xalos ceremonial garment that, despite its grandeur, felt impossibly restrictive, offered a reassuring, if slightly nervous, smile. They had a plan, a desperate gamble concocted in the darkest hours of the night, relying on a piece of human ingenuity and Lyra's absolute authority. Lord Valera's, moving through the assembling courtiers with a chillingly confident stride, his obsidian scales gleaming, observed them from across the grand hall. He was surrounded by his loyalists, their multifaceted eyes fixed on the royal pair with a predatory intensity, ready to witness his triumph. The stage was set not just for a wedding, but for a confrontation that would decide the fate of the Lumina dynasty. As the pre-union rituals began, a long, intricate dance of spiritual attunement and ancestral reverence, Jox kept his hand subtly pressed against a hidden compartment within his ceremonial sash. Inside lay a crude, human-made communicator, salvaged from the wreckage of the Stardust Rambler and painstakingly reconfigured. It was a simple audio recorder and broadcast device, far cruder than any Xylos technology, but it possessed one crucial advantage. It was analog, off-grid, undetectable by Xylos sensors designed for organic energy signatures. He had recorded Valerius's conspiratorial whispers, snatches of conversations where the ambitious cousin outlined his true intentions for the Nexus Harmonizer, his contempt for Lyra's rule, and his manipulative role in Jox's arrival. The tension stretched taut, a thin string about to snap. The air thrummed with the anticipation of the thousands of Xylos gathered, unaware of the impending revelation. When the time came for the exchange of vows, a pivotal moment where Lyra and Jox were to touch the resonance stone, an ancient artifact that would supposedly bond their spirits and grant Valerius his backdoor access. Jox acted. With a swift, almost imperceptible motion, he activated the communicator. The grand hall, typically filled with the soft, melodic hum of Xylos ritual chants, was suddenly pierced by the metallic, almost distorted voice of Lord Valerius. His voice, amplified and broadcast throughout the entire palace, echoed with chilling clarity. "The prophecy is merely a tool," the recorded voice sneered, "a lever to pry open the Nexus. This human, he is nothing more than a convenient catalyst, a primitive key to unlock the true power. Once the union binds him to Lyra's lineage, the harmonizer will be mine. The Lumina dynasty will rule not just Lumina, but the stars beyond." The words, raw and unedited, fell like stones into a silent pool, sending shockwaves through the assembled. Xylos. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Courtiers whispered, their crests flickering wildly with confusion and disbelief. Lord Valerius froze, his normally composed demeanor shattering. His dark scales seemed to lose their sheen, his multifaceted eyes widening in a mixture of disbelief and pure, unadulterated rage. He lunged forward, a snarl twisting his features, aiming for Jax, but Lyra was faster. Her training as a princess, her deep connection to the Xylos martial arts, kicked in. With a blur of sapphire scales and 6 limbs, she intercepted Valerius, her ceremonial blade, now a weapon of shimmering light, appearing in her hand. "You have betrayed the Lumina, Valerius." Lyra's voice, usually so melodious, rang with unyielding authority, resonating through the grand hall, silencing the murmurs. "You have desecrated the prophecy and threatened the very heart of our existence." Her words were not just an accusation. They were a royal decree, backed by the undeniable evidence of Valerius's own voice. Chaos erupted. Valerius's loyalists moved to defend him, but they were met by the swift, unwavering response of the palace guard who, witnessing the undeniable proof of their lord's treachery, switched their allegiance back to Lyra. Brief skirmishes broke. Out across the hall, flashes of solidified light from the guards' staffs cutting through the elegant tapestry of the ceremony. Valerius, cornered and exposed, fought with a desperate ferocity, but Lyra, fueled by righteous fury and years of disciplined training, was formidable. She disarmed him with a fluid, elegant move, sending his own ceremonial blade clattering to the shimmering floor. With a final, decisive movement, Lyra pinned Valerius, her glowing blade held to his throat. "You are stripped of your titles, your lineage, and your name," Lyra proclaimed, her voice ringing with the weight of generations of rulers. "Your treachery ends here. The Lumina will not be swayed by ambition." Valerius was quickly apprehended by the guards, his face a mask of bitter defeat, as order was restored, and Valerius and his remaining loyalists were led away. The silence that settled over the grand hall was different. It was a silence of awe, of profound realization. The Xylos, seeing Lyra's unwavering resolve and Jax's ingenuity in exposing the truth, understood. The prophecy had not been about a random choice, but about discernment, about a partner who could truly see and protect the Xylos from threats both external and, more importantly, internal. Jax, the primitive human, had saved them from their own complacency, from a threat hidden within their most sacred traditions. Lyra, her luminous eyes meeting his, offered a smile that was no longer merely regal but truly genuine, filled with gratitude and a newfound connection. The union proceeded, but this time it was not a forced ritual, but a deliberate choice. As they touched the resonant stone, a vibrant golden light pulsed through the hall, not the cold, calculated energy of Valerius's plot, but a warm, living glow that echoed with genuine harmony. The union of stars became a symbol, not just of 2 individuals from different worlds, but of a true partnership between humanity and the Xylos. Jax, the accidental ambassador, embraced his role as consort, working alongside Lyra to integrate the vast knowledge of the architects, which the Xylos had preserved in their own records, unknowingly mirroring the sphere found by the Odyssey with human innovation. He taught Lyra about human perseverance, about adapting and innovating. Lyra, in turn, shared the Xylos' ancient wisdom, their understanding of organic technology, and the profound interconnectedness of all life. They became an improbable pair, leading the Xylos into a new era of openness and cooperation with the wider galaxy, forever changed by the revelation that true strength lay not just in ancient power, but in the unexpected courage of a human heart, and the shared burden of a shared future. The echoes of the void and the whispers of a princess's unexpected proposal had forged a true union, not just of two beings, but of two peoples, bound by trust, resilience, and a future brighter than any prophecy could have foretold.